So let's say you found the skeleton. How would you tell people that? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
All right, hello everybody. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. In case for some reason you're on this channel, you don't know who I am, which would be unusual. But you never know, people click on things randomly. So I am here with Jordan from Reason2Doubt, a podcast talking about things like philosophy and religion and stuff like that. And I'm going to let Jordan introduce himself. So go ahead, Jordan.
Well, I'm Jordan. Thanks for having me on. I do run the podcast Reason2Doubt. I run it with my buddy Jared. So I'm a mechanical and nuclear engineer, and Jared is a former theologian. We're both atheists. And the podcast is on skepticism. So about half of them are on secular stuff. So we talk about like alien claims or whether or not vaccines are real or effective and stuff like that. And then half the time we talk about religious stuff. So like the problem of evil or young earth creationism. So just trying to spread doubt, you know.
All right. Well, as of course the title says, we're here for leading young earth creationism because you are a former young earth creationist.
I was, in fact.
All right. Well, you're in good company. We've had a lot of guests on here, including me. I was the guest, quote unquote, for the first leading young earth creationism on this channel. For those who don't know, I'm actually kind of continuing this as a series from Bill Ludlow, because I was actually going to be on his leading young earth creationism show. It was scheduled for like 3 days after the day that he unfortunately passed away. So I figured that rather than just giving up on that, I would continue on as some minor tribute to, Bill's legacy, because I also want these stories to be told. So I'll start with my first question, which, Jordan, so how old were you when you first became a young earth creationist? Were you raised that way or what?
I suppose I was raised that way. When I was very young, my mother wasn't super religious. Like, we went to church occasionally, but it wasn't a big part of our life. I honestly don't know exactly what led to my mom becoming more religious. Might have been my grandmother, who was very religious, coming to live with us. But probably about the time I got into like the 4th grade or so, my mom started to get more religious. And as it seemed natural at the time, more religion meant young earth creationism. So I guess I'd call myself definitely young earth creationist from the 4th grade, which would make me like 9 or 10.
It's quite young, but I guess it's not always, because we do have a lot of people on here who are just like, I don't ever remember a time before I was a young earth creationist. So, now before that happened, did you have any actual opinions or beliefs about things like the age of the earth or evolution or anything, or was it just not something, because we were a little kid, so...
I was way more concerned with whether or not the Ninja Turtles were real than the age of the earth. About that time, that's when I got pulled out of public school and became homeschooled. So I think there was like a convergence of a bunch of factors. My mom becoming more religious, which kind of led into us being homeschooled. And then when you're homeschooled, you can teach your kids whatever you want. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So were there any big influences in terms of like quote-unquote professional young earth creationists who were informing your beliefs as a young earth creationist? Like, did you follow a lot of stuff from like Hovind or Ken Ham or any of these guys?
So I did watch some of their stuff. So I remember growing up and watching videos from Hovind and looking up stuff in Answers in Genesis. But it seemed I didn't have this sense, at least until later, that there was like another way to be, or like that there was like this big conflict per se. Like, it was just kind of like, I was a young earth creationist, everyone I knew was a young earth creationist, my textbooks were creationists, so there wasn't like this feeling from me that I was like this embattled minority or anything. It was just kind of, this is the way we're. I knew that other people believed in evolution and we made fun of them regularly in 4-H or whatever, but I wasn't constantly being bombarded with all these questions and ideas because I was just so insulated with our friend group. So if I had to like name an influence, probably it would be the textbooks and the curriculum that my mom picked, which was the Exploring Creation with and then insert subject books.
Yes, I'm familiar with those.
Yeah, so that was my only exposure to science at all growing up. And so my education on evolution and Big Bang cosmology was limited, we'll say.
Yes,
yeah.
to quick straw mans, basically.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm familiar with the kind of thing that you get out of there. I was actually homeschooled for a couple years, or 3 years. I don't remember exactly. It was very early on though. And then I was in public school from middle school on, and it wasn't really heavily creationist, but that does mean that there was like a circle of homeschoolers that I was aware of, and also since starting this, I've also looked into some of the young Earth creationists homeschool curricula and stuff like that. So yeah, it's usually not very good in terms of science. Although usually the math and English are quite good. Usually you get a pretty good ability to do math and write and read when you come out of those, which is, I guess, something.
It's better than nothing. I mean, like, it's not like we learned nothing. Like, we, as a homeschool group, we had some of the parents were doctors, so they kind of took over the science education for everyone. Of course, they were creationists too. So I'd say we probably got a better grounding in what they'd call observational science.
Right.
So we had, chemistry and the periodic table and those sort of things were mostly accurate and real because those are things that creationists like. But when it came to any kind of fundamentals under the field of biology and stuff, obviously we didn't learn any of that.
Ironically, though, if you take too much of a deep dive into chemistry and you start coming up with things like how nuclear processes affect chemistry, suddenly it doesn't work so well with young Earth creationism. Weird.
Yeah, we didn't delve that deeply. I recall vividly. I don't know why this particular example sticks out to me, but there was an illustration in the textbook, and when they were talking about evolution. And so this was like the preemptive strike of the textbook. And they were talking about how in science you make a hypothesis and then you test it. And the picture was this little stick guy running, and there was like a hurdle in the way. And he's jumping over it. And it's like, okay, you pass the test. Then you hit the next hurdle and you jump over it, right? And they say, but if you trip on a hurdle and the guy hits the thing and falls over, you're supposed to stop and like get rid of the hypothesis. But the evolutionists don't do that. They just constantly change it until it fits, and that's not science. So that was my concept of what science was.
Okay.
Growing up.
Yeah, and of course, modifying your hypothesis is in fact an okay thing to do. As long as your modification makes, 1, new predictions, and 2, is still falsifiable. Which is where creationism runs into problems, because they also like to modify their hypothesis in ways that either don't make new predictions or aren't falsifiable, or both.
Or they're just completely ad hoc. So it addresses this one narrow problem, but then they don't apply it to the broader the broader spectrum of problems. So it doesn't fit in any kind of cohesive theory.
Yeah.
But again, I had no concept of that as a thing, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you were, to some extent at least, being miseducated on what science is. So about how old were you when you started to have your first doubts about young Earth creationism?
So I'd say as a young adult, I started, because now I'm out of my bubble and I'm kind of interacting with the world. I had some more doubts. I was kind of interacting with people who disagreed with me. I started going to college, though I didn't get to go very long before I had a kid and had to drop out and do like distance learning and stuff. But so I started running into more objections and things like, I would say stuff like the second law of thermodynamics rejects evolution, and someone would say I was wrong. And then I would run over to AIG to make sure I was still right, So I was definitely asking questions then, because I was a very inquisitive person, and I really wanted to know if I was wrong, and I wanted to know I was right, but I had just been so poorly equipped with how to do that, that it just never even occurred to me to go anywhere else. I just went to AIG or creation.com or CMI or whatever, and then read whatever thing they gave me, and it sounded good to me, so that was it. But even then, there was some kind of I think deep down there was some kind of cognitive dissonance, because I remember I was talking to some of my creationist friends, and I brought up the second law thing, and I was like, this seems so obvious and so fundamental. How could scientists have missed this? Like, how do they not have an answer? But then it was like nothing in my brain went, oh, well, maybe we should find out,
Maybe they do have an answer.
Right. That just never occurred to me.
Yes, maybe all the scientists in the world, almost all at least, didn't actually miss the most obvious thing that defeats every single one of their ideas.
Yeah.
So, did you at some point start going and finding out what the scientific answer was to some of these questions?
So, yes, eventually, obviously, because I'm an atheist now.
Right.
I kind of just coasted along through my young adult life. I got married. I was in the military, and life was just going on. It just wasn't a real big part of my life. It was just a thing about me, but I was worried about other things.
Mm-hmm.
And I was still I wasn't like as enslaved as I was as a child, but birds of a feather flock together. So I went to a church that was espoused young earth creationism, and most of my friend circle did, that sort of thing. And then after personal stuff happened, marriage didn't work out, so I got divorced. So I was kind of like ejected from my entire social circle. So it was just me now, and there was nobody around me who was a creationist anymore. I was talking to a gentleman at my work, a coworker, whose name I should definitely remember because his action set me on the course to where I am today, but I don't remember his name. But I was talking to him about creationism and how I believe that the Earth was 6,000 years old, and I had all these, the canned answers you get from AIG or Ken Ham or whatever. And he didn't have like a knockdown answer for me, but he was like, well, I don't know, but here, read this book. And he handed me The Language of God by Francis Collins.
Okay.
Because he was a Christian, and he wanted the book, if anyone's not familiar, it's a book written by Francis Collins, who's a Christian, to try to convince other Christians that you can be both a Christian and accept science. And I read it, and there was just a lot, like, it answered a lot of the objections I'd had, and it just like opened my eyes to this whole world that I didn't even know existed, and it armed me with better questions. It didn't answer everything I had, but I had the right questions to ask. And so I went and asked those questions and got those answers, led to more questions, and it was just kind of, all downhill from there.
Okay. So, so Francis Collins was a big part of you getting out of young earth creationism, huh? That's interesting.
Yeah.
I haven't actually heard him as a huge influence on too many people. So perhaps that means his book wasn't as effective as he would like.
It definitely did not have his intended effect.
Well, that's too bad, because I think it's a good effect to have, because the Dapper Dino channel is not a channel where like I care if you leave Christianity or you enter Christianity or whatever other religion. I'm here to be like, hey guys, don't reject the science. That's it. That's all I want. That's all I ask. If you're a theistic evolution Christian, good. You're not rejecting the science, so we're good. Unless you're also something else like anti-vax or something, in which case, well, that's a separate issue that we'll talk about. But
Right.
yeah. So I wish it had done a better job, and I also wish that Biologos were doing better at convincing Christians. Although I should note that it's really an almost exclusively American, and even outside of that, it's almost unheard of outside of the Anglosphere to be a young Earth creationist. So it's a weird little parochial problem, but it's just so pervasive in especially the United States, but also to some extent in other places like the UK, Canada, and Australia, who also have significant but less strong presences with young Earth creationism. And but yeah, like you almost never hear about like, oh, the French young Earth creationists, because there essentially are none.
Right.
Like, I'm sure if you took a survey of France, yeah, you'd find some, but like they don't form like a block, like a voting block, like they do in some parts of the United States.
In a large enough population, you're going to have somebody who believes almost anything. But,
Right.
yeah, there's no AIG France.
Right.
There's
AIG tends to stick to Anglophone countries for a reason.
right.
And also predominantly white Anglophone countries. There aren't a whole lot of South African young Earth organizations coming out.
Yeah, it's a very niche thing. It's weird to call it niche because in my country of America, it's like just everywhere. But
Right.
I mean, taking a broader look at the world, it is a very confined thing. I guess there is some level of creationist thought in Islamic circles as well, but that's kind of a different thing.
Yeah, it has a different origin, and it tends to be less concerned with the age of the Earth.
Yeah.
So actually, I have scheduled for, I believe, the 4th of next month, a debate on my channel between Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal, who you know, and a Muslim apologist who's an anti-evolutionist. So
That's exciting.
yeah, we have actually started doing a little bit of like Islam-derived anti-evolution stuff on the channel. But the problem is, most of it is extremely boring to watch, and a lot of the Muslim apologists don't ever really take a stance. So there's really nothing to criticize other than saying, "Hey, you're just telling people to be anti-science and then not giving them a reason," which isn't good content to watch, right?
A reason would be good,
Right.
But
like most of my I've looked through so much Muslim apologetics on anti-evolution, and it's just so boring. I can't put this on my channel. Like, I just can't. But anyway,
Right.
yeah. So we are looking at that. But anyway, back to the thing. So, so the Francis Collin book, did that completely get you out of young Earth creationism, or were there still some nagging things in there?
So it definitely like wasn't a knockdown punch, because I'd been a young Earth creationist for a very long time, and the reason I was still a young Earth creationist is because I genuinely believed that's what the evidence stated, right? But it posed a lot of questions that I just didn't have the answer to, and it was very uncomfortable, not in like a bad way, but you're having like something that was foundational to my identity being challenged. And after I read it, I basically resolved, I want to know what's true, whether or not that's what I already believe. I want to know what's true, so let me go find out. So it wasn't like, okay, today I'm not a young Earth creationist anymore, but it started the cycle where it was like a fighting retreat from not just creationism, but my faith in general, where I was like looking at more questions, I was broadening my view, and eventually it got to the point it's like, okay, I can't hold this anymore. The evidence is too clear. The Earth is not 6,000 years old. So then I went to like, maybe I'm an old Earth creationist. Okay. And then I asked more questions, and it's like, okay, that doesn't work either. Now I'm whatever, all the way down, until there was nothing left. But so it was definitely more of a gradient, but it was not slow. Like I think I'd say I went from hardline conservative Christian young Earth creationist, and like within 2 years I was an atheist.
Okay. 2 years isn't slow, but it's also not exactly lightning speed either. So, that's a pretty good time.
Wasn't overnight.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to know that you went through the old Earth phase and then the sort of, did you have a progressive creation phase?
No, like, because that's more, that almost has like a political aspect to it. And that wasn't part of that particular struggle. I kind of went from like young Earth creation to like theistic evolution, but like intelligent design kind of feel.
Okay.
To, okay, now I'm just going to abandon that completely. And now I'm kind of like where Francis Collins was, God did natural processes, but then I went further than that. And I eventually became like blind clockwork. And then I was like a deist for a little while, and that's kind of sat there. And then like one day I was driving home from work, and it struck me just all of a sudden, I don't think I believe in God anymore. Guess I'm an atheist. Like,
okay. So, when you were doing any of that research, what were some of the other resources that you used besides the language of God?
So, I mean, I nothing sticks out like I use this one resource. It was kind of, I was just learning the process of research. So, like, I would go to peer-reviewed journals. I'd find textbooks. I'd go read slides or take classes from like the MIT or whatever posted. So it wasn't like I fixated on a single source. It was just like I suddenly was handed the internet.
Okay.
It was like I was a middle-aged medieval peasant who was like, oh yeah, by the way, here's all the answer to all your questions. Have fun. And then yeah.
Nice. So now, how did this affect any relationships that you might have had, like with family or any perhaps young Earth creationist friends that you might have still had or anything?
So, like I said, as a result of my divorce, I didn't really have a Christian friend circle anymore. Mm-hmm. So I think had I still been in that scenario, I may not have been receptive to changing my mind anyway. But if in the hypothetical where I got handed this book and changed my mind, I think that would have caused some angst in that context. But because everyone I knew that was in that faith tradition had pretty much already cut me off, there was nobody left to cut off. Like I was already done.
Was that family included?
So my yeah. Well, not all my family, because not all my family was in that kind of insular idea. My mom and like my siblings, but we reconciled like a year or two after that. So that wasn't related to the creationist thing. That was a whole separate thing.
So are they aware that you're not a creationist?
Yes, they're very aware.
Yeah,
none of them are either. Like, I was like the precipitating event. So now like everyone's an atheist.
Okay. Okay. So now what do you think of the various creation like sources of information that you used to go to up until what you were like 19 or 20 when you stopped being a younger creationist?
Probably close to like 24.
24, okay.
24,
so
25.
That's a significant portion of adulthood that you're still a creationist. So that means I think that you probably had a pretty good handle on what they were telling you. So what do you think about them now? Like, just
well, a lot of things. So first of all, I think that fundamentally they're doing a disservice, not just to the people that they're talking to, but like their goal is to, or they usually say their goal is to bring people to Christ and to, be a more biblical worldview and further the Lord's work. And I really think that young earth creationism is detrimental to that entire endeavor because it's demonstrably false.
right.
And so it relies on ignorance in order to persist. And so I think had I been raised not as a creationist, but as, a progressive Christian or a Christian that didn't subscribe to that accepted science, I don't know that I would have had this catastrophic ending of my faith where it was just like a cascading building. I might have ended up an atheist, I don't know, but it was certainly like once the ball got moving, like my faith had been grounded in the fact that the Bible was literally true and all the evidence said so, and that's why I was a Christian.
Right.
I wasn't that was the fundamental portion of my faith. And so when that was gone, there was nothing left to undergird it. Whereas had I been in a different faith tradition where they emphasize more the personal relationship or the community or those things that don't necessarily go away, then I don't know whether or not I would have stayed in the faith. I have no idea, but it certainly would have made it more resilient. So I think that most of them, well, I don't want to psychoanalyze. I don't know if they're being honest or not. They're definitely willfully ignorant at this point, because the truth has been explained to them many, many times, but they're just, I don't know if incompetent is the word, but they're just misguided. They're not executing on the goal that they've stated very well.
I suspect that many of the PhDs are dishonest. Like, Andrew Snelling knows that he's lying a lot of the times when he says things because I know he's been to the sites that he talks about. And I know that he knows that when he goes there, he doesn't see the features that he says he does because no one else does.
Right.
So, like, when he says that, like, I think it's the Tapete Sandstone has cross-bedding angles characteristic of submarine dunes, that he's just lying about that. Because literally everyone who goes to the Tapete Sandstone to check the cross-bedding comes away with, oh, this is an alien deposit from a desert sand dunes. Everyone. So,
I mean, it's either being intentionally deceptive or just the level of cognitive dissonance is so huge that he just can't accept
his ability to use a protractor just goes away.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that would have to be that's the kind of level of cognitive dissonance it would have to be. Like, it would have to be just straight up delusional. Like, you're looking at your protractor and you're just not reading it.
Right. Yeah, it's like I said, for the people like me who are just so insulated from scientific understanding, it's more understandable. Like, you just don't know what you don't know, you know. But for someone who's been through a secular education, especially the ones that have a degree in an actual scientific field, the fact that they can make it through all of that and still at the other end subscribe to this worldview blows my mind.
Yeah. Well, another one would be like when Georgia Purdom says that humans don't have vitellogenin pseudogenes. It's like, did you read the paper? Because they absolutely do. And you need to account for the fact that there's 6 broken vitellogenin genes in the human genome, and why it is that God put 6 broken yolk protein genes in human genomes if they never laid eggs.
Yeah, I wonder if maybe for some of them, and I this is all speculation. I have no idea, but I wouldn't be surprised to learn that some of them have an idea, like they're convinced for whatever reason that they're Christian, they want to spread the word, and for whatever reason they've been convinced that this is the best way to do it. And so I wonder if it's almost like a lying for Jesus kind of mentality. Like if we told everyone the truth, we'd lose people would lose their faith, and then they would go to hell, and that'd be bad. Like, so in order to save them, we have to lie to them. I don't think that they're all like that, but I would not be surprised if some of them have that mindset.
I think some of them probably are like that, yeah. I think that's probably the case for Kent Hovind, because I do actually think that his motives are best explained by thinking that he's winning souls for Christ, and doing that because he wants to get a better place in heaven. He wants those extra crowns that you hear talked about in Revelation.
Right.
And, I mean, I think that's ultimately a narcissistic drive. He wants to be the best kid on the block in heaven, you know?
Sure.
But I do think that's actually literally what his drive is, and I do think that he's willing to do whatever it takes to accomplish that goal of having the largest number of people possible, because of his influence, say a sinner's prayer, and then, according to his easy belief version of Christianity, that then just saves them from now on. And so he gets to put them in his little ledger of souls won for the Lord.
Right. At the ends, it's the ultimate ends justify the means, you know?
Yeah. Because I don't think that he legitimately believes a lot of the things he says, in part because I've seen him concede on some of them, and then just continue to go on with it anyway.
I've seen the exact same thing.
So,
and there have been I've debated him 2 times.
Oh, that's one more than me.
It was I have to say it was a pretty pleasant experience. He was fine to talk to. There were other creationists that were way worse. Like I'd happily talk to him again.
You ever talked to Mr. Batman?
To who?
Mr. Batman?
No, I haven't talked to that one.
I wouldn't recommend it. It's not a fun experience.
The worst one I've talked to is Nephilim Free, for sure.
Yeah, he's up there. He's no longer allowed on the channel after he was told to stop interrupting and couldn't do it.
And, sounds on brand. Mm-hmm. But Kent, like, I was explaining things to him, and he seemed to like listening, and was like, he seemed of the mindset that he'd be willing to like change his mind, and he even said things like, "If I'm wrong, I want to know it." But I think, like you said, for him, it's not even about, like, I don't think Kent really cares if the moon is receding from the Earth or not. Like, that doesn't really matter, you know?
Right.
As long as people bend the knee and, you know, give up their body and soul to Christ, I think that's ultimately, at the end of the day, what he... And because of him, I definitely believe, or I could see a narcissistic, kind of, well, self-motivated.
Icarus says, I think Kent is a con man. His goal is money. I do also think that's in the mix, but I do actually think he legitimately thinks he's going to get like top billing in heaven if he can get enough people to say a sinner's prayer.
So I don't like to psychoanalyze. So I don't know. I'm not Kent Hovind, so I can't say.
But that's just my opinion.
People are complex. They can have multiple motivations, and so like he could be simultaneously like everyone's the hero in their own story, right? Nobody thinks they're the villain. So I could certainly see him having someone having the element of I'm a con man, but also I'm doing the right thing. Like I'm conning people, but it's a good thing, you know, because no one's a villain. I'm sure like John Smith, who the founder of Mormonism, was certainly a con man. But there's no, like, he was demonstrably a con man. Even if you believe Mormonism is true, he was a con man before that. Mm-hmm. And but I think by the end he kind of believed his own con. You know,
you mean he wasn't actually really discovering unrecoverable cursed treasure for people?
I am skeptical of that claim.
That's fair. That's a fair take. Yeah, I'm also skeptical of this claim, and it on its own makes me skeptical of his other claims.
Yeah.
All right. So one question I like to ask, and it sometimes gets a good answer, but sometimes not, is so let's say that you could take one of these creationists who's materially consumed, and sit them down in a room, and just say whatever statement you wanted to them. What would it be, and who would you be saying it to?
So I can pick any creationist and like talk at them for a period of time?
But it has to be one of the ones that you were aware of and whose material you were consuming as a young Earth creationist. So if it's not Nephilim
Gotcha.
3, then nope, it has to be
Gotcha.
someone
Okay,
who you were believing at the time, and now you don't believe this person anymore.
That's a good question. I guess I would probably pick, I can't remember his name, but the author of the books that I consumed as a child, the people who put forth the Apologia is the name of the publishing group, who put forth those textbooks that basically set me up for failure.
Okay.
And I would tell them my story and explain to them kind of in their own terms, like couch it in the language of a Christian, put my Christian hat on. And like, I understand what your motivations are and why you're doing this, but here's why it's failing. Like, I am a person that you could have I don't want to put the fate of my soul on them, but like, I'm a person that you set up for failure because of the way that you presented your material. Like, if nothing else, you should be preparing the people that you are teaching for the real world, because they're not going to stay in this insular bubble forever. And so it's better if you teach them how to research, but really teach them, I just kind of try to convey that to improve, even if they're not going to stop publishing creationist material, even if I can in some way shed enlightenment on that group.
Right. Also, Goopdo3, who was actually on Leaving Earth Creationism this past Saturday, which means this is the first time in a long time I've had one on 2 weeks consecutively. But he says that Dr. J. Weil was the big textbook author. I'm not sure. That may well be it. Does that sound familiar to you?
The name doesn't sound familiar, but again, I'm reaching back to like my 5th grade textbooks. So
right. Okay.
It's been a minute.
Well, I don't have any reason to doubt Goopdo3. So I'm for now, I'm willing to say I believe that may well be the case, but if I were going to put it in like a video or something, I would double check. So thank you very much. So we are going to be going to questions in not too long, guys. So if you do have questions, get them ready. Once I say that questions are open, then I'll actually start looking through chat for questions. So try not to send any until then, because if you do, I can almost guarantee that I will not see them. But when you do put them in there, there's 2 main options. One is to super chat, which will always mean that your question goes to the top of the line. But the other one is to tag me. If you don't tag me, there's a very good chance I'm not going to see it, because I have to start skimming usually once questions start coming in. So tag @DapperDino or super chat. And like I said, super chats go to the front of the line. So that'll probably be happening, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes, depending on what else we feel like there is to talk about. In which case, I'm going to ask a very open-ended question. Is there anything about your journey into and out of young Earth creationism that you haven't gotten to that you would like to say?
So anything that was missed about my journey?
Yeah.
I think we've covered it pretty well. There was definitely a huge echo chamber component, which I guess we've kind of touched on, but that was probably the single biggest driver behind me staying in young Earth creationism as long as I did. Right. Was that nobody I talked to, or very few people that I talked to, were of any persuasion other than mine. So most of the engagement I had with anyone who wasn't of my faith was through straw men or through, anecdote that Kent Hovind told, rather than actually talking to someone. I did occasionally talk to people who disagreed with me, but it was never people who were super educated on the topic, just like rando people that I happened to talk to about. It was always shallow enough that I could go get a doctrinal answer, which is part of why I do things like this and I go on debates and stuff, because I'm trying to reach me from 20 years ago. Because I feel like if somebody had broken through that echo chamber, then maybe I wouldn't have been stuck there so long.
Well, that's interesting, because that was actually going to be one of my next questions, was what got you into talking about these subjects? Because the only reason I even know about you is because I've seen some of the, counter creationist stuff that you've done. I've seen more than just that. Like, I saw your appearance on, I think it was Cheshire Fix channel at some point, wasn't it?
Which one?
Or maybe no, that was someone else. Never mind. I think it was just your anti-creationist stuff then.
Yeah.
So, and because honestly, I don't watch that or listen to that many podcasts because I just don't. So
I don't blame you.
So yeah, you're trying to reach, like you said, the 20 years ago Jordan. But how did you actually get into the point where you thought that this was something that you knew enough about and you were passionate enough about that you actually wanted to start spending significant amounts of time doing stuff like that?
I suppose it kind of just grew organically from me trying to talk to people I knew personally. So some people I went to college with that I knew were still creationists, or friends from a while ago that I'd reconnected to and were open to that kind of conversation. And so I started taking notes for myself, and then I eventually wrote like a 10-page paper, mostly for myself. So I just have like all my sources and arguments there, so I could, then reuse them and stuff. But that led me to, like, obviously when someone challenges you on your assumptions, that requires more research, and I always want to be correct. I want to, if I'm wrong, I want to know it and change my mind. So I think that the conversations I was having with the people around me is what motivated me to more rigorously document the things that I thought I knew,
Okay.
And what launched me into the anti-creation debate thing was somehow Standing for Truth got my name. I don't even remember how. Because I was on one of my buddies' podcasts who on his was more focused on Christian apologetics. He wasn't a creationist, but I think somehow through the grapevine I got hooked up to Standing for Truth, and he was like, "You want to debate a young Earth creationist?" I was like, "Sure, why not?" And then the rest is history.
Now, who was that first debate with? Because I've seen a few with you. I'm not sure which one was first.
That first debate was actually against Standing himself and Raman.
Oh my goodness! Two shining beacons of intellectual honesty and intelligence.
Right. So my very first public debate ever was against Standing and Ramat at the same time, and I think it's my worst performance ever. I mean, it's my first time. So,
well, yeah, first time, first. Yeah.
Part of it was that I naively did not ask questions like more probing questions like what the topic's going to be and like really well define the topic. Yeah. And so when we got there, they wanted to talk all about genetics and I wanted to talk about the age of the earth. So we basically just talked past each other the whole time.
Yeah.
But we had a good enough time that I continued doing it. So yeah.
And did you eventually debate Nephilim Free?
Yes, I have debated him once.
My apologies.
With any luck, it'll never happen
condolences.
again.
My condolences.
Yeah.
I'm not apologizing for anything. I would have told you not to do it.
Nobody warned me, and I should have warned myself. I should have become more educated on the person. That's my own fault. But that was a painful experience because Nephilim Free is a mile wide and an inch deep on everything.
And amazingly cocky about it.
Dude, he is so confident. I wish I had a fraction of his confidence. I'm not that confident about my own field of study. Like, not that I have an undergrad. I'm not like a doctorate or anything. But like, I am way less confident on nuclear engineering than he is. Like, I guarantee he is more confident about nuclear engineering than I am, and I have a degree in it.
I agree. If you got him onto the topic, he would feel extremely confident to be able to talk about all of it. But
for sure.
I bet if you asked him to, say, give you the microscopic cross-section for fission of uranium-235, that he would not be able to do so.
Well, I wouldn't be able to do it off the top of my head, but I know where to go to get it.
Oh, he wouldn't know that either.
But he wouldn't know. But like, for instance, some of the gems from that one was when he said that the second law states that things get more disordered. And I was like, that's not what the second law says, man. And it's an increase of entropy. He's like, no, you're wrong. That's what the second law says. It's like, bro, I'm a mechanical engineer. This is like my thing. It's not true. But he just straight stonewall, like 100% unearned confidence, you know?
It's honestly kind of amazing. But actually, I was not too long ago, James from Modern Day Debate asked if like, oh, hey, you want to debate Nephilim Free? And some family was in town at that time, and so I gave two reasons. No, I was like, one, no, because I'm hanging out with family this week, and two, talking to Nephilim Free is the intellectual equivalent of chewing glass. I'm gonna pass.
I've been trying to get with James on his channel for a little bit. We just kind of been like, every time he has one, I have something, and then it's kind of vice versa. And so I've had to like crosswire so many times I feel bad. So
Yeah.
if he was like, hey, I need someone to debate Neville and Free, I might do it out of a feeling of like social obligation. But it like I'd go in like knowing this is gonna hurt.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, can you hug this porcupine for me? Like,
Well, if it does help, I am starting to be open to hosting more debates where I just do a reasonably neutral moderator thing, which I've done a few times. So if you do have a debate that you want to schedule for a particular time and James can't do it, you can always reach out and I may be able to host that. So,
oh, cool.
Like I said, on October 4th, which I believe is a Monday, we're going to be doing a debate with Finding Truth, and it's going to be can evolution produce novel features in organisms? And so
that's a pretty well defined like topic.
Yeah,
that's good.
Well, that's actually one of the things is I don't want to host a debate that's just going to be creation versus evolution. It's like, no,
right.
Pick a topic within that, because what creationists think that topic is basically all of science, and I'm not going to host a debate in which anything from like relativity to genetics can come up and anything in between. Like, no.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many, like I've joked about, I have a t-shirt press and I make t-shirts sometimes. I've joked about making myself a t-shirt that's like a Google shirt, I am not a, and then geologist, physicist, just like on down the line. Like I can't tell you how many times I've been in a debate on radiometric dating or something. And they're like, well, what about the Big Bang? And it's like, well, I mean, I'll talk about it because I happen to know a little bit about physics, but that's not like the top of this debate. Or like, well, what about this genetic entropy thing? It's like, I'm not a biologist, man. Like, I don't know.
My favorite example of that was Mr. Batman, who's a creationist who you'll see pop up every once in a while if you pay too much attention, was debating at the time Jim Majors, now Dr. Jim Majors, but this was like I think a few months before he got the degree. But anyway, they were talking about, I think it was something to do with biological evolution. I don't remember the exact debate topic, but ultimately it just came down to if you're right there, Jim Majors, then how do you know how do you know that child molestation is wrong? It's like, dude, what are you talking about? Where this is not at all on the it's just it's,
I mean, the moral argument is an argument we can have, but like that's not this argument,
right? It's like, if you want to set up that debate, let's set up that debate. How can you have a secular non-religious moral theory that's justified? That's a great debate to have. Just don't bring it up in the debate on like the flood, right? Like those are not the same topic.
Especially because like I don't know this gentleman, but it's entirely possible he could have been a Christian. You have Christian doctors; they exist. Most of them are Christian just because of the population demographics. So
yeah, like
if he didn't know who he was talking to, you could easily ask him that question. Like, well, I just read the Bible. Like,
Yeah. So I want to say, like, what do you have coming up in terms of your podcast and stuff like that?
Well, we just published our episode. So at the first of the month or the top of the month, we do our secular episode, and then in the middle of the month, we do our religious one typically. Okay. And so we just did our episode on critical race theory. So that published yesterday on the podcast, and then like 5 days later, we put it on YouTube. So the next one we're doing is going to be a bit of a change for the channel. Typically, we're debunking claims that come in, kind of modeling skepticism. This next time, I think we're going to go the other way. We're actually going to make a claim. That claim being that this specific conception of the Christian God doesn't exist. So typically, we're of the agnostic lack theism, but we're going to step out of our comfort zone a little bit and present some arguments affirmatively for that very narrowly defined piece of atheism. But we'll tackle any kind of skeptical topic.
You're going to be making an argument for a particular local atheism case.
Right. So I think, like I said, I'm a soft atheist generally, because I don't think I have or could even possibly have enough knowledge to disprove that any God of any type exists. But once you define it more narrowly, and it then would make more testable predictions, then you can maybe disqualify certain conceptions of God. Say if they were logically inconsistent, for instance, problem of evil sort of things, then maybe you could say definitively, okay, I don't know about every God, but this one's no good.
Okay. Well, that sounds interesting. And I don't want you to give away what the conception of God that you're going to argue against is, because that seems like way too much of a spoiler.
Well, it's got to be a Christian one because that's what we're most familiar with. I don't know.
There are more than one. There is more than one conception of God within the umbrella of Christianity. So
there are many.
They often have certain things in common, but it's definitely not a monolith. Is the conception of the Godhead in Christianity? There's quite a diverse array of opinions, even within what the majority Christian groups would consider quote unquote orthodox. Even within that, there are multiple conceptions of God.
The Christian religion is surprisingly diverse.
Well, it's only surprisingly diverse if you have the sort of American experience of it. When you actually look at other religions, it's actually pretty typically diverse.
But there's whatever background you're coming from, chances are there's a Jesus for you.
That's true. Well, I mean, to be fair though, that is supposed to be one of the selling points of Jesus. Is that
it's true?
He's supposed to be welcoming of people from all backgrounds.
Not necessarily a bug. Could be a feature.
Yeah. Well, I would say that in terms of the success of a religion, universality is probably a feature and not a bug.
Oh, for sure. If you're talking not so much whether or not the religion is literally true, but just features that would cause that to flourish, being able to adapt itself to different situations and to mold itself to the local culture, certainly it would be a huge advantage.
Yeah.
Because if you're rigidly defined and refuse to alter your conception beyond what your home culture is, then you've pretty much built walls around anything you can do.
Yeah. I think that's one of the reasons why the related religion of Judaism, while you can find it almost everywhere, with one exception, it's never really a large segment of the population.
Yeah, well, they're also not a proselytizing religion. So it's much more cultural.
Right. And even if you do want to convert, that's quite the process.
Yeah, they'll let you in, but it's not like Christianity where it's say the prayer, okay, cool, you're in, here's some grape juice and a cracker.
Well, that's some versions of Christianity. There are, in fact, versions of Christianity that aren't that easy to get into. It's actually not that easy to become a Catholic or Eastern Orthodox. You got to do quite a bit of work, and there's a whole long process, and it can often take more than a year to go from not, say, Catholic or Orthodox to becoming an actual member of one of those churches. So
true. My brother-in-law married into a Catholic family, and so he had to do that whole rigmarole.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a whole process.
Yep. So even with just how do you join the religion, Christianity remains diverse.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
Yep. I think that's one of the things that we forget a lot is religions in general are diverse. They're all internally diverse. There's no religion where everyone believes the same thing about the religion. So,
well, religions are collections of people, and people are diverse.
That's true.
So.
All right. Well, sorry. I'm going to open it up to audience questions. So, guys, start tagging me or super chatting. Like I said, super chats will go to the front of the line, and I do greatly appreciate them, but they are also not required for you to get your question asked. And what we're going to do is we're going to open up for at least a half hour, and if questions keep going after that, I may continue it for a little bit. But so for at least the next half hour or so until 20 past, if you ask a question, I will get to it, unless we're overwhelmed, in which case I'll just start trying to go through them. So let's see. Is there anything else that you want to touch on while we wait for the first few questions to come in?
No, I mean, you conducted a great interview. I can tell you've done this interview before.
Oh, so, many times.
Yeah, it's great. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, these are some of my favorite streams. They're not my most watched content, but I think they're valuable beyond just how much it tickles the algorithm's fancy, right? Because
well, yeah, I like, again, coming from my own kind of goal system of trying to break through that echo chamber, these kind of videos would have been super helpful for past me. Hearing the stories of people who understood where I was and had lived the life I'd lived and came to a different result would have been like super helpful.
Well, that's one of the reasons that I like these. In fact, interestingly enough, one of my guests for this was my brother.
Really?
Yeah, my brother came on for one of these. In fact, he had the best mustache that this channel has ever seen.
Okay, what we talk like handlebar? We talk like the curled up points?
It was big, thick, bushy mustache that kind of curled up just past the lips, and he was using copious mustache wax and everything to perfectly form it. And currently, actually, I don't think he even has a mustache, which is a disappointment to me. I'm sure it would be a disappointment if he came back on the channel. But it was interesting to interview a family member who I actually wasn't sure if he was a young Earth creationist up until like a few weeks before that episode. Because, my whole family wasn't. None of us really talk about it much. So, I was not really aware. So, CreoDebunk says, again, Dino, about conceptions, it's about what is more plausible. I would say that I think that if you are going to be a theist, that, you should have the most plausible conception of God that you can. That would be my position if I wanted to say, go be a theist. I don't know. I mean,
just generally, you'd want to start with the most plausible explanation for any phenomena, and then only go to less plausible options when those more plausible ones are disallowed by whatever data you find.
Yeah.
Just as a general guideline to anything, really.
Well, Creationism then goes on to say, like you can have 100 Harry Potter book interpretations, but the correct is only one. Well, actually, I do think there's a little bit of a difference between literature interpretation and philosophical claims about the existence of a god. Because when you start out with fictional literature, it's explicitly not supposed to be real, right? There's no one's trying to convince you that this is a real thing. And so to say that there's a correct interpretation, you could say that there's the authorial interpretation, or that there's a majority interpretation, but I don't think that you can say that any of those are correct in the same way you can say it's correct that there are, this many deer within this square mile area of this park, right? Yeah. That's a thing you can go verify. And if you do verify it, that is the right answer. Other answers are wrong, at least within the margin of error. Whereas I actually don't think there's a one correct interpretation of fiction.
I'd agree. Art in general there's always an element of interaction with the consumer, Yeah. A lot of artists will categorically reject the idea that there's a right way to view their art because it's a give and take with the person who's interacting with it.
And ultimately, even if the artist vehemently disagrees with your interpretation of their work, if that's what you're getting out of it, then, no one can tell you that you're not getting that out of it.
Right.
So if...
As opposed... Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so, again from CreoDebunk, because you just said that all conceptions are equivalent. I don't believe I did say that.
I don't think so. You could have conceptions of a god that are more or less plausible than others, I don't think I'd agree with that, because now whether or not any one of them is objectively true, that kind of depends also on the conception of God. Some conceptions of God would be such that there is only, that God would endorse the view that there's one and only one correct interpretation. Right. But you could certainly have a conception of a God that's more flexible than that. Right. That is kind of the God that comes to his creation where they are and presents himself to that person in a way that person needs. That's another conception of God that I don't think is inherently any less plausible than another.
Okay. So CreoDebunk again. This is now becoming an interview with CreoDebunk. Says, well, okay, view the Bible as a book, what describes actual events and facts. So there's two things here, right? There's one, your interpretation of the Bible as literature, right? What does it say to you as you read it? But then there's also the claims that are made about it, about things like historical or scientific accuracy. And those things, there is a correct history, the things that actually happened. We can't always know it, but there is a set of events that occurred in the past. And they are at least hypothetically recoverable. And if the Bible gets them wrong, well, then the interpretation of the Bible is right about that is itself wrong. But the interpretation that you're taking away from, say, this passage in Ecclesiastes about how you should be, say, humble because, in the grand scheme of things, you're probably not going to be the person who affects the grand fate of the universe. I mean, if that's what you take away and that's true and that's useful to you, then go for it. Have fun
Yeah.
with that interpretation of Ecclesiastes. I mean, I think that is
Yeah.
largely the point of Ecclesiastes. So
Yeah, and even outside of it as a work of literature, it's not like there's one monolithic view of God within the Bible. That's part of the reason, like you said, we have this huge tapestry of interpretations because, different humans have read this book and come away with a completely different idea of what it's saying. So you can read into it the interpretation that fits your own experience to an extent. Now, whether or not that's intended, like suppose the Christian God did exist, I could see that maybe some of those interpretations are right or incorrect, but yeah, I don't think it's as simple as saying, well, the Bible says X, therefore Y, because it's not always clear, and the Bible isn't always consistent on what it's saying.
So Creo Debunk follows up with, you approach the Bible as a purely philosophical and not actual book. Therefore, you can have various interpretations. I'm not really sure what that means. I mean, I own several copies of the Bible in both original and English and Arabic, because sometimes I like to read Arabic. I'm not very good at it, but it's fun. So I don't really know what that means.
I disagree, though. Because I think what he seems to be saying is if you approach it as a philosophical work, so not like looking at it as a book of history or whatever that's telling us literally true things, that's when you get these different interpretations. But I disagree, because when I, as a Christian, was looking at it, I didn't come to it as this kind of like abstract philosophical tract. As far as I was concerned, this was the literal word of God that was spoken to me. And even within that kind of idea, there are still Christians who come to different conceptions of God. Maybe they probably agree on like the broad strokes, but does the Bible prohibit abortion or not? Different Christians disagree, and both of those Christians think that God is literally real and wrote this book and like all those things. So yeah, I just don't think it's that simple.
So Smitty says, no Klingon Bible, Dapper Dino. As far as I know, there is not a complete translation. I think there's some like partial translations of a few books, and I think there's a translation of some of the very short books. But one of the problems with that is that most of those Bible translation projects started quite a while ago, and since then the vocabulary has expanded quite a bit. So really, even the ones that are there really need a massive update. Because you got to remember, there was a time when the Klingon didn't have a word for table. And it wasn't that long ago. I remember when it was. Like, there's a year when the word for table was revealed in Klingon, and it was not as long ago as you think. So, it's really only been in the last few years that really substantial translations like that can be done without a lot of artistic license, shall we say. Like, if you read the Shakespeare translations, they're not very direct translations.
Quick Google search revealed the Klingon language version of the World English Bible, but I have no idea how full of a translation this is.
Yeah, I haven't looked into it in a very long time, but from last I heard, it was far from a complete translation. And also, I believe most of the translators were translating from English and not from Greek or Hebrew, which also puts a little bit of a damper on it, because it's going to be a little... Oh, is there a John 3:16 in Klingon? If there is, I don't know it. Let's see if there is. Because I don't really want to sit here and translate it. Let's see. Oh no, that's definitely machine translated. That is not it. Never trust machine translated Klingon, guys. So let's see.
I found a YouTube video of a chick a young woman in a Star Trek uniform saying it in Klingon.
I did see that, but I don't want to play it for fear of copyright problems.
The channel is Craig Mercer, if someone wants to go find that.
Okay. Smitty says, Klingons were too actionary to have invented tables, Taverdino. They probably imported the English word for it. They did not, in fact. The Klingon word is not anything like table. It's rash. And actually, Klingons are depicted as having tables, and using tables and desks and chairs from their first appearance on. So,
I I feel like that's one of those things that you kind of almost have to have.
Yeah, like,
Like-
tables are just where you put stuff. You got to put stuff somewhere. You can't always carry it.
A surface to lay things on. That's pretty basic.
Yeah, I can't even imagine a civilization getting to space while always having to carry everything all the time.
Or just like throwing it on the ground, which I guess
Right.
would be the other option.
Yeah,
We're
just gonna get
at some
stepped
point
on
you're
and
gonna
broken.
need some level of organization if you're going to build a spaceship.
Yeah, I feel like tables are. I think they're just a universal feature of intelligent life. Is the table after a certain level of technological development.
I could certainly see not having chairs, depending on the biology of the creature. Maybe they don't need them. But
there are human societies that are pretty sparse on seating furniture, and even today, like your average like Japanese home isn't going to have a whole lot of chairs in it. It might there's probably going to be a couch, but like they're probably not eating dinner at a table that's high enough for regular chairs like you would have. They're just sitting on pillows in front of a low table.
But place to put stuff seems pretty fundamental.
Yeah. But also there is a Klingon word for chair. So there you go. Now we can sit at a chair in front of the table in Klingon. Let's see. No, yeah, see, Tesla Ranger, that's the machine translated one that I found. You can tell because it just has the word loved, the, right in the middle of it. Neither of which are Klingon words. In fact, yeah, I guess...
Is there a Klingon word for love? There probably is, right?
There is. Mushhat is the verb. So it would be something like, for God so loved the world. That phrase right there would probably be because God loved the world. I don't really... You might be able to find a place to put an intensifier in there, but that phrase doesn't work well with intensifiers.
This is now the Klingon translation stream. This is
I didn't choose that.
Yeah.
People just thrust that upon us. They were like, all right, Klingon translation.
This is what the audience wants. And who are we to deny them what they want?
Yep. And then the scent bit is a little bit tricky because, like, I would have to dig into exactly, like, what meaning there, because there's a lot of places where Klingon verbs don't map super well onto, say, English verbs, and I'm not sure how well that English verb matches onto whatever Greek verb was being used, so, yeah. Yep, so, but yeah, for God so loved the world, I'm pretty sure it would go there you go. Yay! Klingon hour.
We did it.
It's actually that's not a terribly hard phrase to figure out, because it's just a cause, like a causative clause, and it's a quick little suffix you can throw on a verb to make a clause be like the reason for the rest of the sentence, and then it just starts off the sentence with that little phrase, which it's a very...
I should have worn my Star Trek shirt.
Well, did you not know that sometimes my streams turn into asking about Klingon language topics for no other reason than because I can talk about them?
Hey man, whatever works.
Hey, I mean, look, the Q&A period of these usually becomes a much more open-ended thing where we just sit back and talk about whatever people want to talk about. So,
and what the people want is Klingon.
Yeah, apparently. Actually, I do have a channel member who's working. Actually, I think I have a channel member and a regular audience member who are both working on the language as like right now, like they're doing like the Duolingo and whatnot.
Like making up a language?
No, they're working on Klingon. Well, they might be making up a language too. I don't know, but they're working on Klingon to learning.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Still waiting on Dapper Dino to order Who Killed Captain Alex in Klingon. That might be a fun thing to overdub. Would be Who Killed Captain Alex. Are you familiar with that film?
I'm not, no.
So it's a film, I believe, from Nigeria. And when I say it was filmed on a shoestring budget, like, I don't think you understand what I mean. Because, in America, a shoestring budget is like, oh, what, you only had like $500,000? This is like, oh, what, you only had like $14 and a camera that's a hand-me-down?
I have seen clips of this movie.
Yeah,
I just
okay.
Googled it. I've never seen the movie, but I've seen clips of this movie.
For $5, we have Mr. Wilford, who says, Would you buy one of the new Answers books if it had a Klingon edition? No, I still wouldn't give Answers in Genesis money just because they made a Klingon edition. But thank you for the super chat, Mr. Wilford. I do appreciate it. Creationism says, what I particularly do not like in the views that Bible can be interpreted as you want it is that the rules you invented like that, it is what vaccine deniers do, or I have heard a restriction. I'm not sure I follow that, Creo Debunk. I know English is not Creo Debunk's first language, so I think that might just be it there.
So I think I'd say I'm not, for me at least, I'm not necessarily taking the hard stance. Well, I don't think that there is a correct interpretation of the Bible simply because I don't believe that God exists. And I think that'd be like a necessary component. In other words, it's kind of a work of fiction in my view because of my faith. But assuming I believed in God and I was a Christian still, I'm not sure I would hold firmly to the concept that there is not a correct interpretation, but more just as a practical matter, humans don't like there's as many interpretations to the Bible as there are people. And so whether or not there is a correct one, I don't know that that's something that practically matters. Like that's an interesting philosophical question, but practically speaking, you're not going to find it because, I mean, that there's a reason there's thousands of denominations.
Yeah. I mean, if there's a correct interpretation of the Bible in the sense that the God described therein exists, and he has his own interpretation, and by virtue of being, to some extent, its author, and also the guy who decides kind of what the universe does, which is a whole lot of authority to decide what a correct interpretation would be, then yes, I suppose there would be a correct interpretation in that sense. But like Jordan was saying, in terms of just people running around, there are more than one there's more than one interpretation of the Bible that can be argued for with equal force, I think. And I think there are multiple ones, and even if some of them are more convincing than others, I still think that the ones that are less convincing cannot always be demonstrated as of necessity incorrect interpretations.
Yeah. I mean, even stuff like Jesus' last words on the cross, which there are many, that there's a different version of the last words, depending which gospel you read. But let's just talk, I think it's Mark, where he says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" and then dies. So what's the correct interpretation of this? Assuming that it's true and that's literally what he said and all that. Let's take that for granted. Is it that he was pointing to prophecy, quoting a past edition of a verse from the Torah, and he's like, "Look, I fulfilled this prophecy, and that's why I'm saying it."
It would be
and then
from Psalms,
right? Or was he saying like grieving, like crying out, like, "Why have you forsaken me? I did everything you wanted," and then dies? And it's kind of like this dramatic, powerful thing. Or is it both? Was he both expressing that feeling and also drawing from his literary tradition in order to express that feeling? Like we might quote a movie or a Shakespeare. I think you could argue for any of those interpretations, and I don't know that there's an easy way, short of going back in time and asking Jesus, which one's right, you know?
So Creative Debunk says, ask Jordan if he had believed that RFID chip or vaccine is the mark of the beast, or that there are signs of the end time. Well, I mean, not believing the Bible is true, I can't imagine that you would believe that RFID chips or vaccines are the mark of the beast, because I don't think you believe that there is such a thing.
Yeah, certainly not. Now, if you were asking if creationist me would have believed those things, I wasn't an anti-vaxxer or anything like that when I was a creationist. I don't know, like, anti-vaxxers definitely existed. It didn't seem to be as in forefront of the news as it is now. But I wouldn't have described myself as like anti-science. So, but I definitely believed that the end of the world was coming and coming soon, like most Christians through history have believed. And I was distrustful of the government and all those things. So I don't think it would have been a huge leap for me to go from where I was to that stance, but I don't think I was there.
Okay. I also don't think that I would be there either. I know a lot of my friends from my church circles who are still creationists. As far as I know, none of them are anti-vaxxers. I don't think any of them think that there's an RFID chip, or that the current troubled times are themselves a sign of the, like, imminent in the sense of like, it's going to be in a year or two, end of the world. So I assume that if I had stayed a young Earth creationist, I would probably still be in that circle, at least intellectually. I don't know if I would still physically be there with them as friends. Like I may have moved on or whatever. But so I don't think I would have either. Although it is interesting. Did you see Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal's stream about various professional creationist outlets having to fight off anti-vaxxers in their comments?
Yeah, that leopard eating face party moment has been both entertaining but also like just really sad,
Yeah.
Like and that's like I was actually just about to point to that and like show that even if I personally wasn't going to be there, the mentality that you have to have in order to hold to young Earth creationism of a tremendous distrust of science and its methods and the people who practice it, you have to in order to believe that they're all wrong, right?
Right.
And so that just kind of erodes the wall between where you are and these kind of conspiracy theory sort of mindsets. So one does not necessarily imply the other, but by espousing that, this is why I don't think young Earth creationism is a harmless idea, because it's not that if you believe the Earth is 6,000 years old in and of itself, in isolation, it is necessarily going to damage anything. But because that sort of lack of science education and understanding has real impact, as we're seeing with CMI struggling to get their followers to vaccinate.
Yeah. And also at the same time denying that they're part of the problem in the anti-science attitude of their followers. Yeah. It's like, guys, you've been training these people to reject science for decades. Now that they're rejecting science, you're like, oh wait, no, it wasn't us.
I mean, that science. Yeah.
Right. Let's see. Tyler West says Aaron Ra looks like a Klingon vampire Disney character. Maybe you should ask him to discuss how Klingons view young Earth creationism. If I had a discussion with Aaron Ra, it would be on a much more concrete topic than that, I think.
Then, yeah. I feel like Aaron has more demands on his time than to discuss the inner workings of the Klingon language.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe it's super good.
And how it relates to young Earth creationism, which, spoiler alert, it doesn't. There's no real talk about creationism among people who are, or in discussions about Klingon among people who are into that. Because I was going to say among people who are into Klingon, but that's not true.
That would be a very, very niche group.
Yeah. Okay, so proficient Klingon speakers in the world who can actually carry on a conversation is probably somewhere under 100. People who can have a conversation very fluently is around a dozen. And the idea that would have a heavy overlap with people who produce significant amounts of counter-creationist content, like, besides me, there may not be a single other one.
If you want that to happen, though, the best way to make it happen is to further the spread of Klingon as a language.
Well, so, guys, if you want to see that happen out there, go learn Klingon and be the change you want to see in the world.
Exactly.
So, just go do it. Go download Duolingo for free. Which, it actually is a pretty good course. I will say that.
If I don't know any other language, to my shame. If I was going to learn another language, Klingon would not be the first one.
Would not suggest that it be your first one, unless you have a particular drive for it. I would suggest that Spanish might be a good option.
Spanish, I have heard, is a good lead-in. The language that I'd probably, like, if I could just wave a magic wand and know a language, it would probably be Arabic, just because I have some cultural ties to that. So that would be neat. But yeah, I feel like I'd want to put on the training wheels before I dove into something harder.
I'll say this. I took Arabic in college, and when I got into Arabic 1, the curriculum for Arabic 1 consisted of just learning the alphabet and a few stock greetings. And that's the level of difficulty that colleges are putting the language at. Whereas in Spanish, that's not where you're going to spend. You're going to spend like the first couple weeks learning to pronounce it, and then you're just going to kind of go off and learn some basic grammar. Like you're going to be able to conjugate declarative or indicative mood present tense verbs very well by the end of your first semester. Whereas in Arabic, it'll be like, well, now you can pronounce things. Now, fortunately for me, I was like, I went to my professor and I'm like, is this really the whole first semester? Can I not do this? And so he said, I'll tell you what. We'll look at the paragraph at the end of the first semester section of the textbook, and if you can read it and pronounce all of it, then we'll go on to. I'll have you do the Arabic 2 work, and then I'll give you permission to take Arabic 3 next semester, because the requirements were either Arabic 2 or professor's permission. So I had professor's permission. So yeah, the first day I was there, I'm like, okay, I'll read this paragraph to you, and of course, like, I was one of 2 people there for Arabic 1. All 4 semesters of Arabic were in the same classroom because there was a total of like 8 people. So, but yeah, so then I just read that paragraph. He's like, yeah, fine, you don't have to take Arabic 1. Let's just start you on the Arabic 2 work, and that I'll grade you on that, and then we'll move on to 3, and then we can do 4 the next semester. So, but that's only because I had previous experience with the language. If you don't, it's going to be a pretty arduous.
Yeah,
task.
I've memorized a couple phrases as part of like my deployment train up to go to Iraq. We memorized some very specific and niche things like hello, how are you, line up 1 by 1, put down the weapon or I'll shoot you. Like, not exactly conversation starters, you know?
Well, I mean, hello is a nice one.
That's true. Yeah, assalamu alaikum. I can say that probably with a terrible accent.
That was a pretty terrible accent.
Yeah.
At least for Arabic. It actually works in some other languages because that phrase gets barred into a lot of languages by people who don't speak Arabic but who are Muslim. So, let's see. Creo Debunk says it's about Illuminati conspiracy and signs in the media. What is similar to QAnon theory, if maybe you're familiar with it. I mean, I am aware that there are the conspiracy theories surrounding vaccines and RFID chips, which, by the way, there is no RFID chip that can fit through the aperture of a needle, or a hypodermic needle. It's not going to happen, guys.
Well, like, okay, even if, well, let's just say that they want to track you with a chip. You have a chip already.
In your phone.
It's with you all the time. It's right here, and it never leaves your side. If they want to, they are tracking you in this, and you're doing it on purpose, you know, like.
Now, they're not always actively tracking you, but they can always go back and look. Actually,
Sure.
I was listening to a true crime case, and how did they track the victims down? Yeah, they use their cell phones. They were like, oh, these cell phones never left this property. Like, they were on this property. We don't have any signals of them elsewhere, so they got a warrant for that property, and sure enough, that's where one of them had died, and the other one had been held captive for like a year.
Right.
Because, yeah, they're already tracking you. You don't need a vaccine to have them do it. And like I said, you physically cannot build an RFID chip that's that small. Because one of the things that RFID chips need to do is they're actually powered remotely, right? So electromagnetic radiation has to hit them. And that gives them a minimum size, because below a certain size, the kinds of emissions that you're using to safely transmit this the chip will be too small to effectively interact with it, and it won't actually get the power. And you're well below that point when you're fitting something through a hypodermic needle. Like, you're way below the effective minimum size.
The wavelength of the light of the electromagnetic radiation dictates what it can interact with. That's why radio waves can go through walls and stuff, because of the wavelength, and that's why gamma rays go through everything, because the wavelength's very small. So,
it's also one of the reasons why you can do it. I don't actually suggest this, but you can do an experiment where there are many bugs that are small enough to be able to be in a microwave that's on for a few minutes without actually having any ill effect, because they're so small that they effectively don't interact with microwaves at all. Crew Debunk says, no, around the end of Times Conspiracy and before Corona, this was about the chip implant into the hand. Well, I mean, yeah, that there has long been a conspiracy. So basically, there have been conspiracies about the Mark of the Beast basically forever. So for instance,
since approximately 100 CE when the book was written.
Right. So one of the earliest ones that you might be able to remember is that barcodes, UPC, Universal Product Codes, the barcodes on your groceries and stuff, that they were the Mark of the Beast. Because soon you weren't going to be able to buy and sell without scanning these things. And they have a stop, midsection, and an end code in them. They're the long bars. But the long bars are the same length as one of the options for writing 6 into the UPC code. So there were Christians who were saying, see, it says 666 on every barcode. It's the mark of the beast.
Done.
And I mean, okay, sure, but that didn't go anywhere. There was a time when it was going to be, like, oh, you're going to implant a chip in your hand, and no one's done that yet. And it's going to be, oh, you have to get the vaccine or you won't be able to buy or sell. First, it's not true. You just can't go into certain venues. And, like, yeah, it's what the mark of the beast is changes. Now, I don't want to paint a broad brush, right? Like, a large number of Christians have always been like, no, that's stupid.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably... So I don't want to just say that that's like all of them have this idea, but you've been able to find prominent, outspoken Christians believing almost anything is the mark of the beast for, such a long time.
Whatever the latest boogeyman is. Though I will say, for me personally, if they're like, hey, here's a chip, we're going to put it in your hand, and then you won't ever have to carry a wallet or ID or anything, you'll just scan this, like, sign me up, I'm in.
I would be a little suspicious if
up.
they said that no one can use any other form of transaction. They're like, we're abolishing all other forms of payment. Then I'd be like, actually, that does kind of sound like the mark of the beast. What's going on now? Why would you do that?
Yeah, I'd probably still do it.
Like maybe
if they did it and then they're like, oh, by the way, it has to be shaped like 666. I'd be like, why? Like reasons? Like, okay.
At a certain point, I might start taking seriously that this is actually a fulfillment of a prophecy, because like at a certain point, it just gets a little too suspicious, and you're like, hold up.
Though I will say, like, if I was designing that, with my sense of humor, I could definitely see me designing it as 666 purely for that.
I could see that as like a gag, but here's the other thing, though.
It wouldn't be widespread. It wouldn't work.
Yeah, like if your mandate were to be like to get nearly 100%, adoption of this, you would be best served not to do that.
Right.
But
it would be funny.
Let's see. CreationisM says, so do you think that this theories about the mark are harmful? I think that they're harmful. So I think most of them per se are not super harmful on their own, but I think that they have the same problem that conspiracy theories have in general, which is that once you buy into one, your chance of buying into more and more harmful ones automatically starts going up. So it's sort of like potato chips. If you don't ever have a potato chip, it's not very hard to resist potato chips. But once you have one, it's really hard not to have another one. And then
can't stop.
Right, and then it's then next thing you know, you've eaten your whole bag of potato chips that you bought at the store for all like 600 calories or something.
That was something that kind of has struck me as I've looked into more conspiracy theorists for the podcast, is that the kind of interwoven nature, like the tapestry of conspiracy theories, and some of them are demonstrably harmful. Like I think the QAnon conspiracy theory is tremendously harmful.
Oh, it's gotten people to commit crimes.
Yeah. It like people have arguably died because of it, so it's definitely harmful. And yeah, I 100% agree with everything you said. If you once you've opened the floodgates to the conspiracy theory mindset and kind of divorcing yourself from needing rigorous facts and really just kind of at a basic level not being skeptical anymore, if you've just kind of gotten rid of skepticism, then or looked another way, perhaps gone too far, but I'd say not appropriate skepticism anyway, then it leaves you vulnerable to a lot of very dangerous things.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons that, actually, I know that's one of the reasons that I do like counter-creationist content. Because actually, when my family was in town, one of my parents actually asked, like, so do you actually think that this is like a big deal? And I was like, well, on its own, no. Like, I actually don't think it's a terribly big deal if you think the Earth is 6,000 years old, or you're going to deny science when it comes to evolution or something. But what is a big deal is that it sets you up in a mindset to reject other science, right? Like you might become an anti-vaxxer or a flat earther, or you might, fall prey to other ludicrous things. Like you might be one of those people who's now taking turpentine to help protect them against COVID-19, which do not do. Turpentine is extremely harmful.
Anything but the vaccine. Literally anything.
Yeah. I saw that. Well, the thing is, actually, was already aware of turpentine therapy. And, like, my goodness. Just go get the safe and effective vaccine, and don't eat something that has side effects that include bleeding into your lungs and comas and death from kidney failure. Like, maybe don't do that.
what blows my mind about stuff like that, and I don't know why, because it's not like this is new, but it's still it just boggles my mind every time, is you'll give them this vaccine and they'll go deep into the ingredients and look for everything that seems scary and look for like the tiniest possible side effect that happens 1 in 10 million. Like, look, this isn't safe. And then they go to turpentine or bleach and do absolutely none of that.
Right.
And then immediately take it. It's like...
Well, I mean, the guy who sold me the bleach was a archbishop, and the guy who sold me who done sold, but who was about to administer the vaccine, that's like some kind of nurse or doctor or something. You can't trust those people.
Yeah. No, I mean, they've got a vested interest.
You definitely should instead trust self-appointed archbishops of a church that was just created to avoid going to jail for violating various food and drug laws.
Seems legit to me.
Right. Which is the greatest thing about the bleach one. Because that's run by a, quote, church that only existed once they started getting investigated by the FDA. Like, oh, we're a church now. This is our religious sacrament. It's just like, okay, that's pretty blatant, but sure, whatever. It's, yeah. Don't get me started on the miracle mineral solution, which used to be miracle mineral supplement, but then the FDA was like, no, even if you're a church, you can't say bleach is a supplement. I'm sorry.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
religion. Yeah.
That's not going to prevent. That's also why they told Eric Hovind that he wasn't allowed to sell apricot seeds with a book claiming that they could cure and prevent cancer. They're like, you can sell apricot seeds. You can sell this book, but you cannot sell them as a package bundle because that's just selling people poison with a book that says that they should be taking poison.
Yeah. God says you should take poison.
Right.
So.
And a poison that won't help your cancer, because to some extent, chemo drugs are poisons, right?
Sure.
It's just that they attack certain cells much faster than others.
And also that the poison is always in the dose. Anything's poisonous if you take enough of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, like, when it comes to chemo, it's like you're taking poison that tends to target rapidly reproducing cells. That's why your hair tends to fall out, because your hair follicle cells are reproducing all the time. That's also why you have a lot of GI problems, because your stomach lining and intestinal walls, those are also replacing themselves all over the place.
Right, radioactive damage in general.
Yeah, it does the same kind of thing.
Your cells are much more vulnerable while they're splitting, which is why cancers are vulnerable to them, but also why your bone marrow and your GI tract and all that. It's the same phenomena that is causing both. Which
kind of goes to show that why chemo and radiation are sort of like, on the one hand, very targeted, but on the other hand, like sledgehammers. Because that same thing will eventually kill any of your cells. It's just we want to make sure that we can kill these particular cells fast enough that you don't die before we stop the treatment.
Right.
And it doesn't always work. So
the radiation treatments that are like the directed particle treatments, we learned about them briefly in school, where you basically fine-tune the mean free path of the beam you're directing so that it'll hit the tissue, but not it'll basically have impact at the delivery site, but not on the intervening tissue as much. So it's a much more targeted sort of treatment. That's really interesting.
Yeah. Oh, it's really cool. And actually there's a treatment of mine, a very interesting friend of mine is working on. So I have a friend who is a farmer and Eastern Orthodox deacon who also runs a cancer research lab in Uganda, which is a very interesting combination of things. But he does make a pretty mean pale ale as well as a pretty good hard pear cider.
This sounds like a character from like a zombie apocalypse movie.
It does, but it's a real person. His name's James. So yeah, he's a real person. And by the way, be careful if you ever get a hold of his pear cider, because it's very strong for a hard cider. I remember one night drinking that and not realizing that this stuff was much higher ABV than I was expecting. And it's reasonably sweet and smooth, so it just goes down easy. Yeah. And then you're oh. But anyway, at some point I would like to get him on to talk about this cancer treatment that I think he's no longer working on it, but he was for a while, which takes your own white blood cells and does two things. One, it gives them, you train it to recognize the cancer that you have. So it's preferentially targets that over other things. But then also, you actually turn those blood cells into their own cancerous form, but that only reproduces in the presence of some relatively benign drug, like aspirin or something. And so then you re-inject these blood cells and you put the patient on this relatively low impact drug to keep those white blood cells in a high population, so they're constantly targeting the cancer cells. But then once the cancer seems to be in remission, you take them off of that drug and those white blood cells no longer reproduce, so now they just are going to start dying off at the normal rate. And so now hopefully you'll have neither of the two cancers because they gave you one cancer to attack the other cancer. Because technically those white blood cells are cancerous. I haven't heard a whole lot of updates, but that was what the lab he was running on was working on for quite a while. And it's a really cool technique, and I should try to get him on. So if you guys are interested in that, please let me know, because he is a pretty busy man running a farm at a cancer lab in Africa, and so it's not always and also performing various services at his local mission. I don't believe it's a parish.
While brewing.
Yes, while
cider.
also brewing cider and beer. Yes. Well, that kind of goes into the farming bit, right?
I guess.
That's kind of folded into the farming thing.
Yeah.
But also, like slaughtering chickens and goats and pigs and milking goats and all sorts of stuff like that.
Well, I don't know about anybody else, but that sounds super cool to me.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he's a really cool guy, and he lives a very, very interesting life. So, but I think we're just going to start clearing this out here, because we're not getting too many more questions about anything in particular. But yes, cancer does suck. It is kind of the worst. And I think one of the reasons why I'm always annoyed at people who are like, oh, they're just hiding the cure for cancer is like, cancer is nearly impossible to cure because it's not one thing. Even if you have the same kind of cancer as another person, it's still not the same cancer.
And also, like, that's such a cynical view, because it would require all of these doctors to have not gotten into doing what they're doing, wanting to help people or cure people of these diseases purely just for money. Like, it would require people like your friend to be motivated by nothing more than just pure commercialism, which I'm sure if your friend was like, hey, we'll give you the cure from cancer, but you can't make a dime off of it, would jump at the chance. Sure.
If he were in it just for the money, he wouldn't be spending a lot of his time running a small farm on an Indian reservation.
Exactly.
That just wouldn't be his thing. But he is doing that, and he does that because money isn't his biggest goal. He wants to have enough to be comfortable, to provide for his family, but then he wants to help people.
Even if you want to go more or more worse than that, like the person who cured cancer, and again, like you said, it's a many different things. It's not like there's going to be one solution, but if there was, the person who did that would be a god in the medical community. We're talking like Newton level recognition till the end of time. Even if they were self-motivated, that's a motivation right there. Yeah,
like the idea that there's a cure for cancer hiding in a lab somewhere is just completely crazy. There is
absurd.
Yeah. There's no way that wouldn't get out. Because the other thing is, like, I mean, the people who own this lab are going to get cancer, right? Their friends are going to get cancer. Their family, maybe not in any individual given one, but the thing is, if you live long enough, you're going to get cancer. Right? It basically, if you can avoid heart attacks and dying in car crashes and whatnot for long enough, eventually cancer is going to happen, because eventually some of your cells are going to mutate in a way that your body's not going to immediately recognize, and you're not going to be able to shut it down in time, and you're going to now have cancer. Because the thing is, most people have mutations that could become cancerous kind of often, but your immune system recognizes it and targets it, and it's okay. But sometimes something sneaks through, and given enough time, your cells aren't going to stop mutating. Eventually, one of them's going to have it happen. So eventually, some of these people who are in charge of this, whatever mysterious shadowy lab, are going to get it, and they're going to have that treatment, and then there are going to be people they know who are going to notice, and things ripple out, right?
For sure.
And the other thing is, even though I do think that there's a lot of ethical questions that can come up with pharmaceutical companies, a lot of the stuff that they do is actually money losing. Like, most pharmaceutical companies that develop vaccines do not make profits on them. They usually take a loss on those. They actually do produce those because, believe it or not, you can be both in charge of a big corporation that mostly cares about profit, but also be someone who's like, yeah, okay, but I don't want people to die. So
Right,
I'll
yeah.
take a
The
bit of a
two-
loss to let people not die of horrible preventable diseases.
Right. Like, again, this kind of ties back to what we're saying, where people are complex and have different motivations.
Right.
Like, they can be motivated to make as much profit as they want and still not be so depraved that they just have no human empathy whatsoever. You know?
Right. Or even if they don't have any, they can also recognize that PR is a thing, and that maybe every once in a while taking a loss on a product to boost PR is an okay thing to do. So you can still be motivated by self-interest and still do these things.
A lot of people know the name Pfizer that did know the name Pfizer 2 years ago, I guarantee.
Yeah. All right, so thank you very much, everyone. It's been really great having you guys here. Jordan, you've been a wonderful guest. We'll have to do more stuff together, I think, because there's a lot of overlap in stuff that I talk about that you talk about. So I'm sure we can find some other thing to collaborate on sometime.
Yeah, this was a blast. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for coming on. I know this was a bit delayed due to unavoidable circumstances, and that's perfectly okay. Actually, you're the first person who's ever had to cancel, who's, one, given me notice, and two, tried to reschedule. So, yeah, I've had a lot of no-shows that just out of the blue, just like, oh, no one came. All right, well, I guess that's not happening.
Well, I guess if I have to cancel, I might as well be the first considerate one.
Yeah, it's much appreciated. I have bad luck with this show. Which, to be fair, I mean, most of the people who have asked haven't been people who are used to doing, on-camera stuff on the internet or whatever, or even just, live. So I do get it that you know a bit more how it goes. So let's see, guys. So normally I do a scripted video on Thursdays that comes out. That's been pushed to Saturday, which is the day that I would normally either stream or not. But other than that, I don't think I have a lot of channel news. And of course, Jordan, your next podcast was about arguing against a particular conception of God from Christianity.
Yep.
And when does that
God
come
doesn't
out?
exist. That will be published on the 15th as a podcast, and no later than the 20th. Or sorry, not the 15th. We're at the end of the month. By the 1st in the podcast form, and then no later than the 5th on YouTube.
All right. Well, there you go. And that podcast is linked in the description. Please check it out. It is Reasons to Doubt as well. Or is it Reason to Doubt?
Reason to Doubt. Singular.
Reason to Doubt. There you go. Sorry. Reason to Doubt. And so also Jordan's Twitter handle is listed in the description. So feel free to go check him out on Twitter if you have Twitter. If you don't, I perfectly understand, because Twitter is the worst.
You can also find us on YouTube or Facebook. I guarantee we're so small that I guarantee you, if you would suggest a topic, we will talk about it, as long as it's in any way related to skepticism. So get in on the ground floor.
So not Klingon translations of various books.
No, I can't think of a skeptical angle there.
The only thing that's even broadly close that I can think of is there is a legal question that came up not too long ago regarding Klingon, in that is it possible to own a language? And there's actually a very interesting legal arguments on both sides. One of them is the sort of standard, like, this is the work of an artist, and artist works are generally protected, so the presumption should be yes. But then there's the other stance, which is languages are essentially a collection of facts. So, like, a fact...
You can't own facts.
Right,
yeah.
You can't own facts. And languages really are a collection of facts. Like, what's the word for X in language Y? It's this. That's a fact. You can't own it. What's the grammatical form for, using a verb this way in this language? Oh, it's this. That's a fact. You can't own it. So if languages really are a collection of facts, then I think there's a good argument that they can't be owned. But this came up recently when Paramount, or I think it was CBS at the time, whatever, corporate mergers and splits all over the place. They sued a fan project called Axanar, which was working on a Star Trek fan movie. And one of the reasons they cited in their cease and desist was their use of the Klingon language. And so if it had gone to trial, that would have come up, and there would have actually had to be legal arguments about whether or not you can own a language. As it is currently an unsettled argument. So right now, you could try your luck and publish your own, like, Klingon grammar guide, or your own, like, Dothraki dictionary. It has to be...
That sounds like a...
Yeah, good luck.
That sounds like a good legal video.
That would be a good one.
That would be good.
Yeah. Unfortunately, he tends not to cover too many things where there isn't currently a case. So, guys, any of you brave guys, try to publish a print to order.
All right.
source book for a fictional language that was created for a major media company.
Yeah.
Good luck.
I need somebody to jump in, make a Klingon movie, go to court, go through the whole thing so that I can have a legal video about it.
Well, the tricky thing is, if you use Klingons, then you'll probably lose without the language decision being made, because Klingons are owned by the rights holders of Star Trek. But if it's just a movie involving just regular humans, but they happen to be speaking Klingon,
sure,
now it's a big question. So, good luck, guys. But anyway, that's getting way, way more off topic, and we are actually closing in on the 2-hour mark, which is not very typical for these. So, yeah, thank you very much, Jordan. Thank you, everyone who showed up here, and I'm just going to get out of here, and we're going to say thank you to my patrons and channel members, because without my patrons and channel members, this channel would at the very least be drastically scaled back. You would be lucky to get like 2 videos a month. Whereas right now, it's at least 2 a week, and it's usually 3 a week. So I consider that to be a pretty good upload schedule. So thanks very much to those guys, because they really are what keeps the lights on here. So bye, everybody. I just want to take a second to thank my channel members and patrons, especially those pledging $20 and above. Bob Knob, Bent Hovend, Ian Chen, Chris Love, Sphincter of Doom, The Venerable Bede, and Res Instance. My channel members and patrons help make this channel possible, and without their support, this channel really wouldn't exist. If you would like to help support the channel as a member or patron, there are links in the description to both join the channel as well as join the Patreon. Patrons and members get mentioned in these credit scenes, as well as getting early access to my scripted videos, and if you pledge $10 or above, you can also get access to various 3D assets that I create for Blender, both for use in the channel, as well as just general giveaways to my supporters to help in any Blender projects they might have. If a monthly or annual pledge isn't for you, then there is also a merch store linked in the description. And if none of that's right for you, please just like and subscribe, because every like and subscription really helps the video out. Thank you.